Now let's move on to our first keynote speaker. He's a brand consultant and marketing professor, but I think most of you will probably know him better as the rock star of marketing. Ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Tasmania, Mark Ritson. Mark, are you there?
I'm here. Hey, how are you guys going up there in the Netherlands?
We're good. Should I say good evening, good afternoon, or good morning?
We've entered the morning down here, Trunk, so you can say good morning or good day. Good day is the best thing to say.
All right, well, I hope you've had your first coffee because the stage is yours, Mark.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, I don't have a lot of time, and so what I really want to do is get moving as quickly as I can. I'll talk to you today about creativity and where it sits in the overall effectiveness list. So last year I did some work with the Effies, looking at the drivers of effectiveness. And what I thought I'd do to contextualize creativity for our sessions with DVJ today is look at where it sits in that list and why it sits there. So I'm going to count you down my list and then we'll zoom into creativity. So when I looked at all of the work that had been done and all of the many thousands of Effie submissions that we analyzed, I found there were probably 10 essential factors to generate effectiveness and for campaigns to actually work, which ultimately is where growth comes from, or a big part of growth comes from. I found the 10th most important factor was doing a bit of research. No surprise, but you have to have insight driving ultimately everything that you do. At 9, I found that coming up with a handful of objectives, not too few and not too many, literally a handful, 3, 4, maybe 5 objectives that drive the work for the year ahead, seems to also improve the likelihood of effectiveness. And at number 8, I found that even though we are told increasingly differentiation isn't important, and you can't differentiate anymore, I actually found that where brands attempted to go for a differentiated position, there was a relative advantage. At number 7, here's one that I want to zoom in on for a second, multi-channel mix. We talk a lot about diversity in marketing, but we usually, are talking about the people that we employ and who work for us. It also applies very clearly, though, to the mix of channels. I'm just so sick of the digital versus traditional bullshit that's been going on for years. And it's interesting, when we looked at the data from, as you see here, almost 5,000 different big campaigns across many years, an interesting question was, what's the ideal number of channels? How many channels really drives the ultimate level of effectiveness? And this is what we found. We found that essentially that effectiveness score, which is a proxy of judged effectiveness, continues to go up as you add more channels. So, it's pretty hard to get 10 data points to line up like that in any situation. But essentially the trend is the more channels, the better. Now, obviously, that depends on how much money you have and can you spend it. But the point is, this stupid, idiotic argument about, digital video versus TV. The answer was yes, all along. You wanted both. Clearly, you wanted both. It wasn't news media versus Facebook. It was, I'll have them both. Because clearly, as the data shows you, you get more from more. And there's plenty of evidence to explain why. Analytic Partners, the big research firm, has been looking at what happens when you take a slice of the budget you're spending on one tool, one channel, and put it on another. And as you can see here, the impact is first of all consistent. You're always better off. And these are all, comparisons where the budget has been controlled for. So we're not saying spend more. We're saying if you had 100,000 euro, and if you take that bottom one there, and you were spending it on a radio campaign, carving off a part of it and putting it instead into paid search would give you a 4%, on average, a 4% increase in impact. And you can see some of these synergies are quite significant. If OLV is online video, digital video. If you're doing outdoor, OOH there, and you add OLV, so outdoor plus digital video, plus 18%. TV and search, plus 25%. And the best one of all, TV and digital at the top there, digital video, 35%. So what we're learning is diversity works. And if you want to put it into a very simple, stupid equation, A times B is better than 2A or 2B. I live in quite a posh part of Australia, or at least relatively posh, and everyone's got these pedigree dogs, that are basically inbred, horrible, short-lived things. And I have rescue dogs that people ask me, what's that? What breed is your dog? And I say, I have no idea. She was in a cage for 6 months, and then I got her out of the cage, and she's probably got about 60 different breeds in her. God knows. But the point is, she's going to outlive your stupid fat Labrador there by about 7 or 8 years because of hybrid vigor and the mongrelization of the races, which is a good thing, right? It's a good thing. And that's what this equation is all about. What it says is diversity is better. Of course it's better. And we're seeing it in channels. And I wish we'd stop banging on about which channel is better than another. They're better together than apart. All right, keeping going. Long and short, and I want to add to the long and short, mass and targeted as well as big drivers of effectiveness. So this is really stupid. I'm going to talk to you about the long and the short of it, when the bloke that invented it is going to come on later. Yeah. So really, I shouldn't even be here, right? We should just have Les there talking away about it. But I don't care. I'm just going to steal Les's theory and present it as if it's my own, even though he invented it. Who cares? I get first honors, so I'm doing it. Anyway, Les Binet and Peter Field came up with one of the most important theories in the history of marketing, which is the long and the short of it. You all should be aware of this, right? There are two lines towards growth. The first one is a short line, a performance marketing line. You put some money into something and you spend it, and the red line goes up. And ideally, the amount of money you spend is a lot less than the amount of money that comes in, and you make a significant return. But as you can see, the line is, the minute you take your foot off that pedal, the line of growth goes back to where it was pretty much before. And then there's that longer blue brand building line, more incremental, slower to get going, but incremental nonetheless. And look, this is a very famous theory now. It's got a ton of empirical support. The only problem is we don't have many companies that are actually living the red and the blue properly. Most companies are still spending far too much on the red line of short-term performance marketing and not enough on brand building. And let's be clear, that's stupid, because if you want growth, let's take, a 3 or a 4 year period. If you were to split your money up 50-50, arbitrarily, never mind do a bit more work, and invest in top of funnel brand building and then performance marketing to the same budgetary amount, you would make more money than if you continue to do too much performance marketing. So that prompts the question, why is everybody so stupid? Because they are stupid, because they're, ironically not making as much money as they could. I've spent a long time trying to work this out, and I think I have the answer. So most companies, if you're lucky these days, are working within a 12-month planning cycle. So it's all very well for Les Binet to turn up with these fancy slides that are 2 or 3 years in horizon, right, on the x-axis. The reality is companies never see that, because what they see from their myopic 6 or 12-month planning cycle is this, right? And if you're confronted with this red and blue options over a 12-month period, what you're going to do is go, all right, hang on a minute. Red is better than blue. I'll put all my money into red because the return on investment is way better than in that stupid blue stuff. And what we're learning, and it's a very hard lesson to explain to people, is ROI is a half stupid variable. Yeah, it's good in the sense that it can measure different red options. But if you use it on all of your marketing efforts, it's ultimately going to send you, ironically, in a suboptimal place in terms of generating returns. ROI doesn't generate the best ROI. Dwell on that. Yeah? And so what happens is it's fucking Groundhog Day every day in most marketing companies. Because what they do is every year go, I know I should do long and short, but look at my return on investment for red. I'll do red. Yeah? And I'll do red. Oh, another year I'll do red. And I'll do red. Long-term planning is not the incremental addition of lots of short years. It's looking across the long and being smart enough to have a long-term strategy, long-term investment, and make more money as a result. Now, I wanted to link the long and the short with also the mass and the targeted. One of the real areas of confusion for most marketers at the moment is, am I meant to target segments like what I was taught in the 80s and 90s? Or am I supposed to target everyone like Byron Sharp and Ehrenberg Bass in their black uniforms keep telling me? What do I do? What do I do? And I'm pretty sure the answer is, again, both, or yes and yes. If you delve into some of the data, and I'll be honest, and I'm sure Les will point this out later, I'm stretching things here, but come with me on my stretch. If you look at some of the IPA data from Les and Pete, and you look at what generates the best activation effect, so what gives you the best performance marketing short-term result? Is it existing customer segments? Is it targeting new customers out there? Or is it going after essentially everyone and doing that sophisticated mass marketing? Well, the answer, interestingly, is still existing customer segments. So targeting does still work, at least for the short of it. But when we turn our attention for the stuff above me for the long of it, we see a different picture. Looking at those same three elements, I'll twist my head to one side and you'll see this instead. What that tells you is Ehrenberg Bass are indeed correct. When it comes to brand building, you do want to go after everyone. You do, if you can afford it, do sophisticated mass marketing to build the brand. But that's top of funnel, emotional, mass marketed brand building stuff. Now down below, when we're doing the shorter term performance marketing, bottom of funnel conversion stuff, you absolutely want to go after different segments in different ways with different product positioning. And I believe that's the way to play the game. Anyway, and number 4 is something else that Les invented, but I'm still going to qualmlessly present it as if I know more about it than the man who invented the topic. Excess share of voice, ESOV, very important in a recession. So, although Les invented the term along with Peter, we think he's not even sure, about 20 years ago, it actually is an area of insight we've known about related to growth for around about now 40 years. So there's this weird relationship between share of voice, how much you spend on total communications in the category versus the competitors, and share of market share. It's actually an almost perfect equilibrium in many cases, meaning if a brand has about a 10% market share and it has about a 10% share of voice, the equilibrium says it will probably stay about in that position going forward. Excess share of voice refers to companies that start to actually increase share of voice relative to market share. So right now, this brand here has a ESOV, an excess of 0. 10 minus 10 is 0. But if that brand gets aggressive, let's say it says, I'm going to double my marketing budget for next year, yeah, and all the competitors don't respond and continue with their same budgets, then suddenly we got a 20% share of voice and a 10% market share. That's an excess of plus 10. What happens is eventually, keyword eventually, the equilibrium will again establish itself. So over time, that excess share of voice leads to a market share in parallel. And the reverse is true. If you've got a 20%, let's say, share of market, and you want to save some money because you're a finance person or a recession has come or whatever other reason, and you cut your share of voice relative to the category, well, for a year or so, sure, you'll save yourself a bit of money, but very quickly the equilibrium wins, And what do you know, your market share will start to decrease. Now, the key question here is it doesn't happen overnight. And the other key point is, in a recession, many brands are now finding in the Netherlands and elsewhere a very helpful situation, because many other companies now are reducing their advertising spend significantly, and some are going out of business. It can be that simply by maintaining your advertising spend in the COVID period, you may be getting excess share of voice, and you'll still get that equilibrium effect. Now, the key point here is you don't get it overnight. And again, great work done by Les and Pete suggests that on average, if you had a 10% excess share of voice, you'll pick up around 0.6 or 0.7 market share growth per year. But again, a key point, that varies across different sectors. And another key point, in times of recession, it almost triples because of the effect we just talked about. All right, nearly at the end. Before I get to creativity, which has not been mentioned yet, so it's right up there on top of my list, I want to mention codification. You know, differentiation is still important, as we said, being seen to be different, relatively different from the competitors. But distinctiveness is far more important, and we're learning more and more about it. Distinctiveness isn't about competitors. Distinctiveness is about you and your customer, and it's about coming to mind. We've already talked in our introduction today about linkage scores. Linkage scores are a fucking disgrace, right? Let's be honest. On average, you probably are looking at linkage scores in most categories, in most countries, that rarely get above 20%. Meaning, if you serve your TV ad to 100 people the night before, less than 20 of them will A, remember the ad, and B, be able to link it to the brand that was in the ad the next day. Around 80% or more of most advertising is therefore totally wasted. Use creativity to be able to drive recall of the ad, but use codification to make the ad look like you and make the linkage score stronger. There's been some great work by Ipsos this year looking at different codes or distinctive assets and ranking them in terms of which have the biggest impact on driving salience among consumers. And this is very useful, right? So characters, fluid or fluent assets, as System 1 call them. The Jolly Green Giant is a good example, right? A character you create that personifies the brand has a 6 times impact versus the index. So, just having those characters pop into view has a smashing impact on linkage and recognition. And you can see then we go from celebrities to package all the way down to slogans, etc. But what's interesting of this research is sonic brand cues, which is a fancy millennial 21st century way of talking about jingles, remains the most impressive way to drive distinctiveness, at least among the distinctive assets. So I'm sorry you've come all this way for this digital 21st century conference, and some old professor locked up in a cupboard in Tasmania is telling you need to get yourself a jingle. Now, before we get to number 1 then, here's where I put creativity. I put it at number 2 on my list, yeah? It's not quite number 1 for reasons we'll get to, but it beats everything else by a very significant degree, yeah? By multiples, I would suggest, yeah? Having creativity driving your advertising, communications, and overall approach is massively important. Again, work from Analytic Partners looked at what drives effectiveness in TV, online video, even online display. You can see the blue of the creative versus the red of media. Look at online video. All anyone ever fucking talks about is targeting and serving ads and all that shit, right? It's only a 30% of the actual impact. Most of it is the ad any good? Imagine that. Nielsen found the same thing a couple of years ago when they looked at what drives effectiveness. Targeting was 9% of the impact. Recency, when you serve the ad, was 5%. Reach was 22%. Media context around the ad, 2%. The brand itself, 15%. But again, almost half the impact across a number of different media was from the creative. Now, you go home tonight and you talk to your husband or wife in the kitchen and you say, what did you learn today, darling? And you say to your partner, I learned that whether the ad was any good has a massive impact on whether it's effective or not. They would say to you, yeah, that's great, darling. That seems bloody obvious to me. And it is obvious to normal people. The problem is we've lived through a decade where marketers have been obsessed with media and have kind of forgotten about creativity. So one of the things I looked at with my FE analysis was looking at all the submissions, again, about 4,000 in this case. Do they literally talk more about the creative ideas, or do they talk more about the media, or is it roughly the same? Now, 2010 and prior, it was all either let's talk mostly about the creative, or media and creative were the same. But during this crazy ass decade we've just lived through, look what happens. You get this period, 11, 12 to 15, 16, where essentially they talk more about the media choices than they talk about the ad that goes in the media. So think about that. It's like talking about the frame more than the painting. Yeah. It's like talking about the pipe more than the shit we stuff into the pipe. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. Obviously media is important, but clearly the thing the media delivers has to be generally more important. And it spawned for me, Dave Trott told me this story, but David Abbott, who's probably the most famous British ad man who worked in Britain as opposed to David Ogilvy, David Abbott lived through this period and he coined one of the great criticisms of modern advertising, which is shit that arrives at the speed of light is still shit. And his point is, yeah, that's great. We're all talking about serving ads and targeting and digital this and digital that. Is the work any good? Is the creativity really driving the message? And the great Tom Goodwin recently posted something similar a week ago. He said, it's mind-blowing to create a Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn campaign after all these years working in creative agencies. You spend hours on targeting and retargeting. The basis of your ads are optimized, how best to bid for spots, what sites to use. Hours on how to track success, the metrics that matter, how to best refine. And at the last minute, as a little afterthought, you upload the creative and the messaging and the call to action, like some tiny, irrelevant afterthought. You can do a little cute video if you want, or a carousel, whatever. Just bung in some creative. It explains a lot about the total shit show that is online advertising. And note something, digital media has tremendous creative possibilities if we just stop thinking about it as a media and start thinking about the creative opportunities we have. So before I finish, so I put creativity up there, man. I put it up there at number 2, right? It's super important. But I have to confess, it's not the most important factor. And this always disappoints people. The most important factor in success and driving effectiveness and driving growth is brand size, how big you already are. Yeah, big brands just get it so much easier than medium-sized or small brands. And this comes up every time I ever talk about effectiveness. Yeah, I go through my list and then someone in the room, usually badly dressed in a cheap outfit, says to me, look, I don't have, I work for a small brand. And we haven't got enough money to do lots of research, to have multi-channel, to do mass targeting, to do long-term brand building, to have excess share of voice, to hire creative agencies. So what do we do? How do I get my effectiveness? And I say to those people, you don't. You're fucked. Yeah, you're going to stay small. Just no one's told you yet because you keep reading ridiculous articles that tell you, ooh, little agile brands, ooh, going to use Kung Fu. Little agile brands going to beat the big brands. That never fucking happens. Yeah, capitalism isn't fair. It was never meant to be fair. Yeah, the big brands always win. They have established share of shelf, share of mind. They have distribution networks up the wazoo, existing brand equity. It's just not fair. And the reason everyone gets surprised when we get to this at the end is they've been told all this bullshit about David and Goliath and how David will beat Goliath. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in the Bible. I think it's total horseshit, right? But you might believe in the Bible. I don't know. So it's true in the Bible, right? But it's sure as shit not true in capitalism. In capitalism, David doesn't beat Goliath. Goliath beats the shit out of David, smashes his head in about 4 seconds, and goes home and cooks himself a big pie. Right? That's the metaphor here. Big brands win. And if you come back and look at my list again for a second, what does it tell you? It tells you that if you aren't a big brand, the only real things you can play are numbers 2 and 3, because creativity and codification don't require bigger budgets. And if anything, I'd say smaller brands are can be more risk taking and can actually go for it harder. So the importance of creativity, especially for the smaller brands, becomes even greater. Do you like my Dutch, by the way?
I love.
All right, so there's my top 10 drivers, and there's creativity straddled neatly at number 2. I think it's a good list. It's not very scientific. My research is based on very wonky data, but I think it provides a nice little checklist. And the challenge for you guys, as you listen to this wonderful day of content, is start thinking about how you might be able to use them to drive your marketing further forward. But don't make the mistake of thinking I'm some patsy and these are the 10 things. I'm not Simon Sinek, these are the 10 things you want to put in your little pie chart. Number 1 is literally 18 times more important than number 4 or 5 based on the other data I've seen. Creativity is 7 times more important than taking a multi-channel mix. So those top 3 or 4 are super important, and creativity is right up at the top as a massive driver of effectiveness and growth. Okay, that's my spiel over. Back to you in the studio, and I'm open for questions of any kind.
Thank you so much, Mark. Yes, we loved your Dutch. And if I had a creativity award right now, I would hand it over to you gladly. I don't have one, but I loved everything you had to say, and so did all our viewers. So let's start with the first question from Alexandra den Hartog from the Dutch department store Hema. She asks, what is the turning point? Production is much higher if you do many channels, so that decreases your media budget, and spending across too many channels probably leads to worse optimization. So where is the turning point? Mark?
There isn't one, and this is a very, very good question, but a very, very blunt answer. Clearly, you don't want to be spreading yourself too thin, and that's a key point. But equally clearly, the more channels you add, and I'm thinking very broadly about what I would define as a channel, the more effective you can actually be. And there's a tendency for many media strategies to focus on optimization and putting all their egg in one basket. I think that's a mistake. And I think if you look at long and short, I think if you look at 360 media effects, I think the data is very clear. You want to progress a diverse strategy. Now, clearly, if you don't have big budgets, you can't be doing TV and outdoor. But the point is, it's still possible to have different channels and hit that sort of magical S-curve in the middle where you get the maximum response by moving to smaller, less expensive channels. So, yeah, I'm aware that there's a tendency to say, look, we only want 3 or 4 channels. I disagree with it. I think the more you can spread the love, the better.
There you go, Alexandra. Up to Felix Morgan from Wargaming. Gaming. How should you approach reach media if your product has a limited addressable audience? That is, marketing a video game that requires people to have a gaming spec PC to access it, which is only a small percentage of the people who would see a TV. Should we be concerned with the amount of waste in these forms of broadcast media?
Yeah, you should, Felix. I mean, to give some credit to the Dark Lord of penetration for a moment, when he talks about mass marketing, he is talking about it, sophisticated mass marketing. So what he's saying is, obviously, don't go after your granddad if you're doing wargaming. What you have to do, first of all, is identify what the total mass market looks like for your product. And if you have something like a particular spec of, I have no idea how this works, but there's a particular spec of PC you need to be able to operate the software, but that's the total market, right? It isn't everyone in the population. So I think there is a middle ground there that says, we keep talking about mass marketing and reaching everyone. For candy bars and banks, that tends to be the whole population. But for wargaming software, it's still those that would and could do it. Do you know what I mean? However you choose to define it. That's a key parameter.
All right. Thomas Verheugd from Damon Shipyards says the following. So what priority should these team drivers have from a strategic perspective, also in favor of marketers? Also, not to become the delightful village of Happisburg, as you wrote in Marketing Week.
Yes. Look, the priority, I'm keen on not being too prescriptive, right? I mean, there's a top 10 list there. In terms of priority, I think most marketers are smart enough to look at it and recognize their weak points. So, you know, it's up to you, I would suggest at this point. It's a smorgasbord for you guys to look at and select from. But I would again point out that those top 3 or 4 drivers are the things that have to be in place. Now, brand size is an output, not an input, but securing the right levels of creativity from proper creative agencies, codification, doing long and short-term planning, achieving excess share of voice if you want to grow. It's I'm not saying excess share of voice guarantees growth, but it's very bloody hard to achieve it if you don't have some form of excess in the market. Multi-channel, as we've talked about. So it's up to marketers now. There's the list. Choose the ones that you can go after and choose your weaker ones that you're not doing well.
All right, Mark, thank you so much. These were the questions that people had for you. We learned and we laughed. Thank you for that. Thank you for both.
Thank you, Val.
All right, so people, one of the perks of having a virtual congress is